Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive straight in. We're going to unpack a biblical passage today that I guarantee you've seen before. I mean, it's literally everywhere, printed on coffee mugs, stitched onto throw pillows, plastered all over social media. But here's the crazy thing. It is almost never actually unpacked for the incredibly powerful psychological and spiritual cure it offers. So today, we're deconstructing Philippians 4:6 to find the actual mechanism of peace hidden right there in the text.
Okay, so do not be anxious about anything. Look, we've all heard these words, right? Sometimes you get them texted to you at 2 a.m. by a well-meaning friend who just kind of doesn't know what else to say. But let's be totally honest for a second. For most people who receive this verse right in the middle of a panic attack or deep worry, it simply doesn't work. And it's not because the verse is wrong or, because God forgot about you. It's because nobody ever actually explained what it means.
Which brings us to a huge question. If this verse is true, why does it leave so many of us feeling ashamed? Seriously, when someone tells you to just stop worrying, it usually just creates this devastating burden of shame. Take this woman, Alina, for example. She'd been a faithful Christian for over 20 years, led a small group, served in her church, the whole shebang. Yet she was left completely paralyzed by panic attacks, so severe she sometimes couldn't even leave her house. And people just kept telling her, read this verse, trust God more. But being told to stop feeling the exact thing you literally cannot stop feeling, yeah, that doesn't produce peace. It just piles shame right on top of the anxiety. So to fix the treatment, we've got to properly diagnose the problem first. Anxiety isn't really what most people think it is. At its absolute core, anxiety is your brain's attempt to solve an unsolvable problem of uncertainty. Your mind basically locks onto a future that refuses to become certain. Maybe it's a medical diagnosis, a rocky relationship, a financial crisis, and it just starts running endless calculations. What if this happens? Or wait, what if that happens? And the calculations never end because the future never resolves. That is what keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Now that we understand what anxiety actually is, we need to dismantle this toxic misunderstanding of Philippians 4:6 that leaves anxious people feeling like they're somehow failing at their faith.
Which brings us to section 1, the coffee mug myth, and why this is such a toxic misunderstanding.
All right, really notice the contrast here. Most people read "do not be anxious" as this strict, harsh prohibition. They think Paul is acting like a beat cop writing you a ticket for the crime of worrying. But look at the actual instruction. Paul says do not be anxious about anything, but in everything present your requests. You see that? He isn't saying just refuse the anxiety. He's actually handing you a map to redirect all that heavy, spinning mental energy. The command isn't to stop feeling, it's to do something highly specific with that feeling.
And context is absolutely everything here. We have to remember, Paul is not writing this from some comfortable, quiet, air-conditioned office. He's writing these words from the dark, grim reality of a Roman prison cell. He's literally got chains on his wrists, facing a trial that could easily end in his execution. He's survived beatings, shipwrecks, you name it. This means his map to peace is battle-tested in the absolute worst of circumstances. He is speaking from the other side of anxiety, offering a cure he actually used himself.
So let's get into section 2, the mechanism of peace and the spiritual and psychological gears running underneath it.
Paul writes that we should present our requests with thanksgiving. Now, this has confused people for generations. I mean, how are you supposed to feel grateful when your whole world is falling apart? Well, here is the crucial point. Thanksgiving is a declaration of history, not some manufactured feeling. Paul isn't demanding you slap on a fake smile. He's telling you to anchor your terrifying present reality in the hard, verifiable evidence of God's past faithfulness. You come to God with your history, stating what you already know to be true about him, entirely regardless of your current circumstances.
We actually see this exact mechanism play out in the Psalms. Think of Asaph's raw, sleepless prayer in Psalm 77. He is in absolute distress, so overwhelmed he can't sleep, he can't even speak. But then he shifts. He says, I will remember your miracles of long ago. He intentionally introduces a competing truth about God's character, and that interrupts the anxiety spiral. It forces you to look at the anchor instead of just staring at the storm. And this brilliantly illustrates the big payoff in verse 7, where it says the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. That word guard, it comes from the Greek military term phroureo. It literally means to stand watch, garrison, or post soldiers at a gate. So, the peace of God acts as a standing army, stationed right at the gates of your mind, keeping watch so that panic cannot reach the walls. It doesn't say your problem will instantly vanish. It says you will be guarded. This distinction is just incredibly important. Consider James, a highly control-oriented surgeon whose youngest son was facing a very serious illness. For the very first time in his life, he couldn't operate or research his way to certainty. But when he applied this practice, intentionally remembering that God had never once abandoned him, he found that this peace didn't instantly cure his son, but it steadied his posture. He stopped trying to see the whole road ahead and just started walking it one day at a time, knowing for a fact he wasn't walking it alone.
Now, before we get to the specific steps, we hit Section 3, Therapy and Medicine, and why faith is not a substitute for them. We have to critically address the physiological reality of clinical anxiety. Some anxiety is deeply rooted in brain chemistry, in trauma, and in very real physical realities that absolutely require professional care. God gave us medicine, He gave us therapists, He gave us the incredibly complex science of the human mind. Using professional care is a matter of wisdom. It's stewardship of the body and mind you are given. It is absolutely not a failure of your faith. There is literally no Bible verse that acts as a magic substitute for necessary medical care. Therapy and faith are companions. They are not competitors. The peace of God promised in Philippians 4 is that profound foundation of security that you bring right into the counselor's room, right alongside the really hard work of clinical healing. They work together. Okay, so how do we actually do this? Let's check out Section 4, a practical blueprint, outlining the exact steps for that 3 a.m. panic. In everything, present your requests. Because anxiety has this remarkable ability to scale, right? From literal life and death situations all the way down to sending an awkward text message or stressing over a meeting you have to run. Paul insists that absolutely no worry is too mundane, too embarrassing, or too trivial to bring to God. You have to bring this specific, concrete thing keeping you awake out of the dark and directly into the light. So here is the specific anatomy of the prayer Paul is describing. Step 1, anchor yourself by starting with thanksgiving. Literally name 3 true things about God's faithfulness in your past. Step 2, drag your exact worst-case scenario into the light. Name the fear specifically. Say it out loud if you can. And step 3, intentionally release control of the outcome. Just put it down, leave it there, and refuse to immediately start running those mental calculations again. Once you've done this, you have to give the peace of God a moment to actually arrive. Psychologists call this externalization process cognitive reappraisal. And as Elena, the woman with the severe panic attacks we talked about earlier, eventually found, the change might not be some dramatic lightning bolt from the sky. Instead, it's often a slow, quiet realization that the tight grip on your chest has loosened and you are finally breathing deeply again. The standing army has taken its post at your door. Finally, Section 5, Jesus in the boat and His presence in the storm. To wrap up our explainer today, we need to be very honest about what this passage does and does not promise. Paul doesn't promise that the thing you fear won't happen, or that they're going to live this perfectly smooth life without storms. Think about the story of Jesus and His disciples in the storm on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples are totally terrified, the waves are crashing, and Jesus calms the storm. But don't miss this. He was in the boat the whole time. God doesn't promise a life without storms. He promises His very real presence inside the boat with you. He absolutely does not wait for perfect conditions to be with you. The peace of God is given to people who have completely run out of their own peace. So, since the God of the universe doesn't require perfect conditions to enter your storm, and since He has never ever abandoned anyone who came to Him, what specific terrifying fear will you finally hand over to the standing army today? Are you ready to stop carrying it all by yourself? Start right there and let the peace follow. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.